Hello, everybody, and Happy New Year. Winter has come. You can feel it. And I'm not just talking about the weather. There's a growing sense of dread that our democracy is on the brink of disaster in a far more definitive way than we saw in 2016 and even in 2020. Everyone is wondering, what if Donald Trump wins again? It's a question I get asked over and over again wherever I go. What will happen? I don't know. Nobody knows for sure. But I've been saying for years now, America as we know it and the American way of life is at grave risk. Our republic faces an unprecedented fundamental threat. Many are treating it like the season finale of a TV show, like there's no real difference between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, when of course the two candidates are worlds apart. If our democracy fails, if Trump somehow wins the second term, everything will change. Michelle Obama knows it.
I am terrified about what could possibly happen because our leaders matter. Who we select, who speaks for us, who holds that bully pulpit. It affects us in ways that sometimes I think people take for granted.
Chris Christie knows it too.
I am not going to be part of a generation that willingly stands by and says, it's too hard, he's too loud, he's too strong, and the only country that can defeat America is America. And the only people that can stop it are us.
Chris Christie sounds like he's stumping for Biden already. And Jill Biden will also be stumping for Joe too.
We have to win. We must win. We cannot let go of our democracy.
And if you don't?
I don't know.
I can't even think about it.
No, I can't think about it.
And Joe Biden most definitely knows it. Others say it's all too complicated. You're averting your eyes, hoping for the best, but you don't want to get involved. It's way too complicated. And many of you feel like you can't change things anyway. Some of you are hoping it'll just go away if you don't look at it. But that's not the case. If everyone chooses to look away and no one takes part, I can guarantee you the very worst will happen. Our democracy will be over. By definition, every American has a voice in this. And in an election so unusual and unprecedented, every vote in every state will count. Remember in 1980 when Ronald Reagan beat Jimmy Carter, even winning states like New York? Well, that's because there was a third-party candidate, just like Robert Kennedy is running this year. So make sure that no matter where you live, you're taking this election seriously, because every vote will count. For those of you who need clarification on this, let me explain what's going on. Beginning in 2016, but likely earlier, a coalition of nations, networks, and powerful interests conspired against the idea of democracy, mainly American democracy. You see, unlike any other nation, America is founded on an idea, government by and for the people. Destroy the idea, and you destroy America itself. And who exactly is threatening democracy? Well, I call them the enemies of democracy, the EOD. They include nation-states like Russia, China, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE, and democracies like Israel, Hungary, and Turkey that have slidden into dictatorships. You can see in those countries what happens when a dictator takes over, and a glimpse of what America might look like under Donald Trump, and it's very unappealing. The enemies also include religious organizations and networks like Opus Dei, the Catholic Knights of Malta, and the ultra-Orthodox Chabad Jews. You might have seen that incredible video this week of a group of ultra-Orthodox Jews attempting to stop a tunnel from being filled in that was discovered under the main synagogue in New York City. The Chabadniks were up in arms about this, but you have to wonder why an ultra-Orthodox Jewish sect needs a tunnel system under New York City with exits into every manhole around the entire city block. The enemies of democracy also include well-funded groups like the Council for National Policy and the Federalist Society, and a lot of billionaires. What the enemies of democracy have been doing is spending a fortune on creating a facade. So what you see on cable networks is really just a show. The real forces are taking place behind the scenes, where the EOD has funded these massive organizations that are designed to divide us, that are designed to lie to us and control our narratives. They have compromised the entire GOP, the entire Republican Party. If you often sense that there's an untold story you're not hearing, trust those feelings, because there's an untold story. And the biggest untold story in the news right now is the document release of the Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein court files. It's a sordid affair. An influential financier with a bottomless appetite for girls, his occasional girlfriend, the daughter of a notorious Mossad agent, Robert Maxwell. And for years, they've been trafficking young women to the rich and powerful. And when you follow this stuff on Twitter or read the news reports, the implication is that these famous friends, these powerful politicians and celebrities, are part of some, disgusting pedophile network that is preying on victims. And perhaps in some cases, that might be the case. But more often than not, when you really look at what Epstein and Maxwell did, is they hunted for these celebrities. They chased after these prominent politicians and academics, and they spent hours in nightclubs searching for just the right girl to match up to Prince Andrew, just the right girl for Bill Clinton and Bill Richardson or George Mitchell. Of course, now none of this reduces the actual culpability or the guilt of each of those politicians. They should have known better. But in many cases, these were high-profile targets were being preyed upon by Epstein and Maxwell. They were being targeted and then they were entrapped. Basically, Epstein and Maxwell ran a compromat factory. It was on the show in 2019 that the world first found out precisely what Epstein and Maxwell had done. That they were running a compromat factory, blackmailing American politicians and public figures, and doing it for Israeli military intelligence. There had been rumors before. I was able to reveal this after interviewing a former senior commander of Israeli military intelligence, Ari Ben Menashe. He confirmed the ongoing ties with Omad, Israeli military intelligence, and he had also confirmed that Robert Maxwell was a Mossad asset years earlier, so he definitely has credibility in this area. This episode is designed to look back at one of our top 5 episodes, but there's a lot of new information coming tonight. It's a shortened version of the original episode, and stick around because I have a lot of new information to share about what we discovered in the Epstein flight logs, plus brand new information about Clinton and Epstein and Trump and Epstein. All of that is coming up. But first, let's go back to 2019, when we first broke the story of how Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell operated a blackmail ring against politicians. And now tonight, we're going to introduce you to a man who is a former military intelligence asset. Not only an asset, I should say he was a spy handler, one of the biggest spy handlers for military intelligence. He's no longer there with them, but he's the real deal. I'll tell you why in a minute. You'll learn about his history. Now, he's come to us to get on the record because no one else has come on the record to say this guy's a military intelligence asset. He's coming to us to talk about what these guys have been up to, why they did what they did. I can only take his word for it because I don't have any other information other than what I've described for you today. But this guy's the real deal. His name is Ari Ben Menashe. You might recognize the name because he was a big deal in Iran-Contra, I would say. Maybe not in the best way, but he was one of the people who was involved in that massive arms deal in the 1980s when the Israelis, particularly, were funding the Iranians in their war against Iraq. And you might recall, the United States didn't mind that. They even participated a little bit. And together, the Israelis and the Americans sent over $130 million worth of arms to the Iranians, which I'm sure they're very thankful for. The bottom line is this guy was the real deal operator back then. It's during that time, and we're talking about 1980, early 1980s, that he met Jeffrey Epstein. And he met Jeffrey Epstein because he was introduced to Jeffrey Epstein by Robert Maxwell. And Robert Maxwell was the spy that Ari Ben Menashe was handling. And if you talk about famous spies in Israel's history or any history, Ari Ben Menashe's guy, Robert Maxwell, was about the biggest as you can get. He was a famous British publisher. He ran the Daily Mirror. He was larger than life in many ways. He was a big guy, but he also, did many things, including some say maybe helped the end the Soviet Union. Other people criticize him for a lot of the things he did to his papers. He basically bankrupted his papers by spending their pension schemes. He also maybe leaked very sensitive information to the Russians and to the Israelis. But these guys were big deal intelligence assets. And He started off as a Soviet spy, and in fact, died maybe at the hands of Mossad, who many people say he had crossed the line. He was threatening to reveal some of the secrets, and he just became uncontrollable. So the Mossad actually said to have eliminated him. But Ari also met Ghislaine through Robert Maxwell. Ghislaine is his daughter, of course. It turns out that Ghislaine and Jeffrey have been having a thing for a lot longer than people imagined. We've been told only that Ghislaine and Jeffrey sort of started seeing each other when they moved to the United States in 1991. But as you're about to hear from Ari Ben-Menashe, that their romance started way, way earlier. And it was Robert Maxwell, the famous spy, who introduced Ari Ben-Menashe to Jeffrey Epstein, who introduced Jeffrey Epstein to Israeli military intelligence in Israel, and who introduced all of them to a very different world that he embarked on as he changed the rules for being a spy. I want to introduce you to Ari Ben-Menashe. So you have to wind your mind back 40 years. It's hard to imagine that a story that's happening today, 2019, Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, still has the same players as were around 40 years ago in another big story. But that's in fact exactly what happened. So suspend your disbelief, if you will. Let's go back to September 1980.
Deep in Iranian territory, Iraqi armor chalks up fresh successes on the battlefield.
It became known as the Iran-Iraq War. The United States supported Iraq. Israel secretly supported Iran. Israel wanted to sell weapons to the Iranians, and the Reagan administration agreed to let them. Ari Ben-Menashe was Israel's point man on the covert arms smuggling operation. He set up shop in London and recruited the foreign editor of the Daily Mirror, Nicholas Davies, and the paper's publisher, Robert Maxwell, to his team. Both men had the perfect cover for conducting arms deals while doing their day jobs. Together, they formed a front company called Aura and transferred hundreds of millions of dollars in weapons to the Iranians in secret, until reporters found out and gave the world the Iran-Contra scandal.
Here's the All in the Family chart. So we got Robert Maxwell, famous spy. He was a media baron. There's really no other way to describe him. He was the kind of person, you think about Rupert Murdoch as the kind of guy that Robert Maxwell was. He believed more in himself than anything else, but he was also pretty much a criminal. He was a huge Zionist, believed in Israel, and supported Israel in many ways. Loved the idea of Gorbachev and opening up the Soviet Union. He was a KGB spy who tried to steal secrets from the United States and smuggle products into the Soviet Union. He really is a larger-than-life kind of mythical character. And surrounding him are even other larger-than-life characters. Ari Ben-Menashe, you're about to hear him talk about what his views are on Ghislaine Maxwell and on Jeffrey Epstein. But Ari Ben-Menashe also has a really storied career, who 40 years of being inside Israeli military intelligence and then being outside. Today, he's a consultant for some interesting countries. Up until recently, he was Robert Mugabe's consultant in Zimbabwe. Certainly there's some questions about his choices, but he's had a thriving career all the way through, except for 13 months when he spent it, which he spent in jail. And those 13 months were courtesy of the Iran-Contra affair. Now, he wasn't ever found guilty, but he was acquitted. But he did spend 13 months, and he goes into that in the interview. And then, of course, there's Robert Maxwell's daughter, Ghislaine Maxwell. She's one Maxwell had. And they all went off to do different things, some of them in the spy industry, some of them not. But Ghislaine is the one that certainly has grabbed the headlines and continues her father's sort of dark arts, whatever, craftsmanship that she has. And Ghislaine met Jeffrey Epstein in the early 80s. We can reveal to you now for the first time. Up until now, the story has been that they met in the 90s, but they met in the 80s in London in the context of this Iran-Iraq war, in the context of the Iran-Contra scandal. And then you also see Ehud Barak there. And Ehud Barak is interesting because he has been Epstein's friend, or was Epstein's friend, for 18 years as well. For as long as this, he said, I can meet you within 48 hours. Come to Montreal, I'll talk to you. But you got to do it in person. I'm not talking to you on the phone. I'm not getting eavesdropped by anybody. Can I bring a camera? No, you cannot bring a camera. No. Can I bring an audio recording device? Can I at least record the interview? Yes, I could bring an audio recording device. So what you're going to hear is just the audio of a conversation. It lasted 2 hours.
Except what happened was that Maxwell introduced him to us, and he wanted he wanted us to accept him as part of our group. I'm not denying that we were, at the time, that we were a group, that it was Nick Davies, there was Maxwell, there was myself and our team from Israel. We were doing what we were doing.
On September the 22nd, Iraqi planes attacked Mehrabad airport outside.
Selling arms via
There was a project. It wasn't selling arms.
Right.
It was transferring arms to Iran.
So we're talking about Iran-Contra, basically.
Yeah.
We're talking about that same arms deal as Iran-Contra.
Israel was very concerned about the Iraqis taking over southern Iran.
So Maxwell introduces you. He says,
Yeah.
here's this young guy.
Yeah.
And did he go by the name Jeffrey Epstein, or did he go by a different name?
I remember Epstein, Jeff Epstein.
Okay. Because he had a different passport that he was traveling in and out
That's
of.
right. Yeah, but that came later.
Okay. So he says to you, here's this guy Jeffrey Epstein, who I know from around.
And your Israeli bosses have approved,
Okay.
already approved.
So it came down from up above. So what did he do? Can you say what he did for you? Like, what kind of work did you guys do together?
No, he didn't do anything.
Oh, so you met him and that was it?
I met him a few times in Maxwell's office. That was it.
And did he do any arms deals for anybody else that you were aware of?
Not that I know.
Because there's the I guess there was an
He didn't.
MI5
He
operation.
wasn't very competent. He didn't seem to be a competent guy. He didn't seem to be. But he was a good-looking guy. And Miss Maxwell.
Ghislaine, yeah.
Fell for it.
That early, in the 80s.
That early. How old was she?
She was young.
Yeah.
But most of the reporting about her and him only started in 1991 when they got to the United States.
Yeah, I realized that, but they were already.
They're already dating. So he was.
Call it dating, whatever.
So they were he was part of the family business.
Yeah, and Maxwell started liking him, and my theory is that Maxwell, because Maxwell felt that this guy is going for his daughter.
Right.
He
felt like he could bless him with some work and help him out, and like he felt paternal for him. Was she part of the business too? Was she involved in what you were doing over there?
No. But later on,
yeah,
she got involved with Israeli intelligence together with him.
Right.
But not in this arms deal in Iran or in business.
Would you say she was an agent as well? Was she someone working for Israeli intelligence?
Oh, definitely.
Military intelligence as well?
Yes.
And when that happens, because I have no idea how that world works, so I'm learning a little bit.
It happened by accident.
Do you get orders and you have to do certain things, or is it more like...
No, you get projects. What really happened, my take on it, and the later thing, is that these guys were seen as agents, but they weren't really competent to do very much. And so they found a niche for themselves, blackmailing American and other political figures.
For the Israelis?
Yeah.
So it's hard for people to understand why Israel would want to get blackmail on an American. I'm asking a question that I can answer it quite probably, but for most people it's hard for them to think about Israel as being blackmailing their leaders in the United States. It's a very...
It was quite their MO. See, sleeping around is not a crime. Maybe embarrassing, but not a crime. But sleeping with underage girls is a crime.
It was a crime in 2000 as well, when they let him off
And
the
then
hands.
it's always. So he made sure these girls are underage.
Sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. The Daily Mail published pictures of him entering Epstein's New York residence in January 2016. Around the same time, several young women tied to the billionaire also came by.
And why do you think Ehud Barak spent all these years associating with this man?
After a while, what Mr. Epstein was doing was collecting intelligence on people in the United States. So if you want to go to the U.S., if you're a high-profile politician, you want to know information about people.
Mm-hmm. So he was getting that information. He was getting the dirt. He was receiving the dirt from Epstein, basically.
That's right.
I heard that one of the things that Epstein liked about the relationship with military intelligence is the ability to access all this very high-tech spy gear, which he was able to use.
Yeah, I'm listening stuff, sure.
So was Epstein and Barack, is that what they were doing, basically? He was part of the blackmailing scheme?
Epstein was blackmailing people.
But was Barack part of that blackmailing scheme?
He would benefit.
He'd benefit from it. Was he providing technology for it?
He was too high up to do it directly himself, but he would give the go-ahead.
A special report from ABC News.
News for you. Sources telling ABC News that Jeffrey Epstein died by suicide overnight at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in Manhattan.
I spent 11 months and 3 weeks in the same place Epstein was, and it would have been impossible to commit suicide. Impossible.
Oh, you were at MCC in New York?
I was in MCC in New York, same place.
No one commits suicide at MCC. It's
impossible.
Right.
Impossible.
Right. So who did it then? Who did it?
I'm not saying anything. All I'm saying is it's impossible. I mean, there's nowhere you can hang yourself in the cells.
They say off the bunk bed, right? They say he tied himself onto the bunk bed and leaned forward. And how do you die that way? It's not even...
I don't know.
It's not
Maybe he was specially gifted, but I doubt it.
The other rumor is that he was given space to commit suicide, that he was, and I don't know if this happens in agent world or in espionage, where you're like, you're going to have to kill yourself because you've lost usefulness. You become a liability.
I have theories about who wanted him dead. Probably there were quite a number of people in the States wanted him dead, but...
Mainly. You look at it. Yeah. They have the most to lose from all of this coming out.
Because you really didn't want the stories to come out.
It had Compromat Factory targeting our politicians, targeting our leaders, our scientists, our academics. The facts are just beginning to gather in a certain way that it's hard to look at it in any other way. It's hard to understand why Epstein and Maxwell would have done this. Why would they have gone through all this effort if there wasn't, firstly, a lot of money to be spent doing it, but also if you had some sort of national goal in order to try and exert your pressure, to exert pressure on politicians in America who might be drifting away from your national interest, maybe then you can see how it's done. But it's still very hard to imagine how, my birthplace, I should say, my birthplace is Israel, and it's troubling for me especially, but also I'm sure for everyone who believes in the state of Israel and who believes that there is some sort of shared value or shared values between these two countries. So let's leave that there. I mean, it's good to see me at a much younger age and how much these last few years have taken a toll on me. But it is, it's 2019 that story came out, the biggest story we've done here on Narativ, I think, in terms of impact. And I say that because as we look now today at these Epstein-Maxwell files, there's so much vindication there in those files for what we originally reported. I mean, primarily, this story for a lot of people is about Bill Clinton. And until we came along and made it about Donald Trump, because that's in fact what it needed to be. Our research on Jeffrey Epstein indicated that Donald Trump and him were really good friends all the way into the 90s, that they collaborated on various business deals, and that along with Thomas Barak, another possible special agent or spy, ultimately wasn't convicted, but he was certainly charged in that area. The three of them were sort of the three musketeers, if you will, in New York City, and also having a lot of fun, with women and whatever, but that they also, at that point, established this kind of relationship between these intelligence agencies, which until today are collaborating on this attack on democracy. So, we're seeing something that began many, many decades earlier. I would argue this actually began with Robert Maxwell. That's how early it began. And if we're lucky, I'll play you a little clip of something that confirms that. But the point I'm trying to make the most about is that this is not about Epstein, Maxwell's desires to sleep with young women. It's not even about the politicians' desires to sleep with young women. Most of these women, when you really look at them, they didn't look that young. They were sort of, very sexy women, but they were not underage in appearance. And certainly when they met a lot of these celebrities, they weren't underage at all. I mean, there might have been a couple of instances where they were underage, but I'm not trying to justify any of that. What I am trying to say is that there is an attempt to make this all about the desires of Epstein and Maxwell and the desires of politicians, when it really is not about that. It's about the blackmail. It's about the fact that there was an operation to, on a mass industrial scale, compromise our politicians in a way that they couldn't do their jobs, that they couldn't execute the policies that you had elected them to do. So let me give you something that isn't, let's call it a hypothetical, but it isn't actually that hypothetical. In Bill Clinton's case, Epstein was assigned to Bill Clinton, we think, early on in his career in the United States, because they were worried that Bill Clinton was going to do a very easy deal for the Palestinians and ultimately force Israel into a deal with the Palestinians that Israel didn't want. So they put Epstein on Clinton as an early fundraiser. And then, later on he became many other things to Clinton, but ultimately he was on his fundraising committee initially. And that all involved Bill Clinton being the start of getting to know Bill Clinton and compromising him. Now, that happened for many, many years. I still think about the Monica Lewinsky scandal and think about what these guys did for all these other politicians and how similar that is to what happened with Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky. And maybe there's a connection there that we still have never heard of. Maybe there's a Monica Lewinsky connection to Epstein or Maxwell or Israeli military intelligence. Who knows? It does seem to me that he was a target from well before he was even in power, and that Jeffrey Epstein was assigned to Bill Clinton to make sure that perhaps the Oslo Accords wouldn't be instituted correctly, or that there wouldn't be a successful peace deal that Bill Clinton could assign. I'm going to say that's hypothetical for now, but it's not completely hypothetical. It's based on some comments I've heard over the years. And so when you think about something as massive as that, as the Israeli-Palestinian peace deal, when you think about something like that being blown up by a blackmail scheme designed to compromise our politicians, and then you think about George Mitchell, who was also involved in some very high-profile peace negotiations. You think of the amount of secrets that came into Bill Clinton's hands and Secretary Clinton's hands, and you start to see the scope of all of this. Bill Richardson's involvement in all of these events that we know of so well in history. And these are just the politicians we know of. So you can really see that there is a framework here. This was not a corruption of children. Of course it was too. It was that. But it was a corruption of the entire political, celebrity, entertainment, sports universe of America. They went after all the biggest names and they tried to corrupt everybody. They tried to get as much dirt on everybody so they could control everything. And you think about the ambition of something like that, and the fact that they were able to execute that is quite remarkable. The fact that it was allowed to continue when we knew at some point that it was what it was, ultimately a blackmail scheme. It's kind of stunning to me. And so we fast forward to today, where we've got Mike Johnson, a potential Russian asset who's now the Speaker of the House, as we discussed many weeks ago here. And also these really interesting admissions that are beginning to come out from other GOP reps. There's a great clip I'm about to play you from, I think you say it's Tim Burchett. Tim Burchett is the guy who got into that scuffle with Kevin McCarthy a few weeks ago. I'm not sure what the scuffle was about, but I'll tell you something. I've never heard a politician be as blunt about what happens to Republican politicians by Russian assets as he was with this podcaster the other day. So I'm going to play you this clip. He's talking to a right-wing podcaster. But Tim lets it be known exactly what Republican politicians are going through on a day-to-day basis as they're confronted by what seems like an industrial-scale blackmail operation designed to compromise the entire party. I'm going to let you listen to this. This is Tim Burchett talking to the Benny Show. And let's listen to what he has to say about the way the honey traps are set by Russians.
You got powerful people, and they write the big checks. Well, let's be honest. And powerful people in this country, they write the big checks, and they're the ones out on the tarmac when the president comes and visits, and whichever party they're in, they always either out on the tarmac or in the private room. They're the ones that write the big checks. They don't care who's in. They hate this country. They hate what we're about, but they love their portfolios and they love their money more than they do anything else. And they protect it, and they protect the people that do that. And by doing so, the old honeypot, the Russians do that. And I'm sure members of Congress have been caught up. Why in the world would good conservatives vote for crazy stuff like what we've been seeing out of Congress? It's how it works. You're visiting, you're out of the country or out of town, or you're in a motel or bar in DC, and whatever you're into, women or men or whatever, comes up, and they're very attractive, and they're laughing at your jokes, and you're buying them a drink. Next thing you know, you're in the motel room with them naked, and next thing you know, you're about to make a key vote, and what happens? Some well-dressed person comes up and whispers in your ear, "Hey man, there's tapes out on you. Were you in a motel room on whatever with whoever?" And then you're like, "Uh-oh." And he said, "You really ought not be voting for this thing." And what do? It's human nature. And, no man or no woman actually is an island, and they know what to get at. If it's women, drugs, booze, it'll find you in DC and in most elected offices. And that's what people of power and influence do. And it's just, I've been in this game my whole life. I spent 16 years in the state legislature in Tennessee and 8 years as county mayor. And now I'm in my 5th year of Congress, but it's just, the stakes are higher, but the game is still the same.
Isn't that telling that we are, in a world now where these GOP politicians are so corrupted that they can't even do their jobs? And I believe that to my core, that Donald Trump has the Republican Party by the you-know-whats, and he's not letting them go. So this is, the Republican Party that we have now is sort of cultist Republican Party that is engineered to just attack Donald Trump's enemies. And how does that happen? How does that happen over the years? It happens over the years because the Israelis and the Russians together, had this Epstein-Maxwell operation to corrupt all these people. Now, I've reported to you before that Epstein and Maxwell worked for OMOD, that's Israeli military intelligence, and that's now a proven fact. I think no one can really dispute that, although some people do try. But they also worked for the Russians, like their father, like Robert Maxwell. These guys were operating for the GRU as well. In Robert's case, they were involved with the KGB. So there's some interesting analysis that we've been doing just on the flight logs of Jeffrey Epstein's plane, because it is very revealing that, the things we found out about where the flights were going to point to the same two nations, Russia and Israel. The most destinations were 11 for Israel and Russia, respectively. The Kremlin has always had an affinity for Israel, so it's not surprising. But there's 11 flights each to Russia and to Israel, and it's fascinating to me that the Russian legs included St. Petersburg and Moscow, and it's just fascinating to me that's just the sheer numbers of it all tell the story right there of who he was reporting to. He was reporting to the Israelis and he was reporting to the Russians. And the two organizations have got a long history, along with the Chabad movement, of working together. They've cooperated through the Refusnik years, through the pogrom years, you name it. They've had a close relationship. And today, Putin and Bibi Netanyahu have a very close relationship. So you can see how that thread of this, Russian Israeli intelligence operation to compromise Americans and compromise American politicians began so early and continues until today with the same intelligence agencies that were responsible for the 2016 attack on democracy, and probably the same ones that are involved in the disinformation assaults that we're seeing even today. So keep that in mind. Now, it's interesting that amongst the people who are traveling, in this particular on these trips to, let me pull this up a different way, because it is actually quite interesting what we found out about Maxwell in particular, but also about Bill Clinton and the amount of times he went traveling with Epstein. So in terms of Bill Clinton, let me back up here a little bit. So in terms of Israel and Russia, there was 11 plus trips between 1999 and 2005. Among the passengers that went there on a couple of occasions, Bill Clinton went with Jeffrey Epstein to Russia, along with Kevin Spacey and Chris Tucker. Now, what was he doing there? I don't know. But did we know that the former president was on a trip to Russia in the early 2000s? I didn't know that. To Israel, Jeffrey Epstein took 12 plus trips from 1999 to 2005. Maybe that's not that many, but along the way, he took Ehud Barak with him on a couple of trips. And they also had a couple of flights which also had unnamed staff. What is that? What are the unnamed staff? Who are they? Are they just additional spies being sent back and forward to work with Jeffrey Epstein? It's unclear to us who they were. In contrast, the Saudi Arabians, they had 3 Saudi trips recorded on Jeffrey Epstein's flights. But that did include some royals. Now, with Clinton, which is interesting, between 2002 and 2003, in just 1 year period, maybe it's 2 year period, let's call it a 2 year period, Clinton went on 11 trips with Jeffrey Epstein. And this is after he was probably compromised, involving Monaco or whatever else. It was probably after that all happened that Bill Clinton still connected with Jeffrey Epstein on a really friendly basis. And I don't know why that is. You'd think the guy compromised you. You'd probably not continue to have this friendship. But maybe he didn't know, or maybe there's a lot of money that was being offered to Bill Clinton through the Clinton Foundation, which Jeffrey Epstein always used to say was his idea. So 11 total Clinton flights between 2002 and 2003, according to the manifest. It included trips to Asia, the Middle East, Africa, sometimes in a single trip. So some of these were very vast trips that took on Africa, took on Asia, and one of them, Hillary Clinton was on one of those trips, and she stayed in Asia for some conference while the boys, it seemed, went on a continued trip to parts of Asia and part of Africa. So did Bill Clinton lose his ability to understand that Jeffrey Epstein was compromising him? Did he not know ever at all that he was being compromised? And does he know today? Does he know the extent of it? Certainly in any public comments, Bill Clinton has always said that it's been 4 trips to the island, and that was it. So let me wrap up with one last thing, and I will take any of your questions if you have any on YouTube or anywhere else. I'll be happy to answer those tonight. As you can tell, it's been a very long, tiring day for me. For personal reasons. But let me just tell you a little bit about something that you need to think about when you think about the difference between Donald Trump and Bill Clinton in terms of Epstein. These are 2 former presidents for sure. You got 2 very distinct guys who are former presidents. One's clearly a Democrat, one's clearly a Republican. But their relationship with Jeffrey Epstein is very different. I mean, Trump was a mobster in New York and very much in cahoots with Jeffrey Epstein in many, many things, including chasing women, but also, in various schemes and business deals they had, you name it. These guys were not unfamiliar with each other in a business sense. Remember that Donald Trump did the Miss Teen America contest. There's always been questions about what happened to the girls there. We've had people on our show discuss the controversial events. So, when you look at Epstein and Donald Trump, you have to ask the question, they were more business partners than in the case of Clinton, where he was really more of a target. Bill Clinton was someone that they needed to compromise, that Epstein and Maxwell knew they had to get on tape with some young women in order to keep him in check. I'm not saying that did happen. It seems like maybe it did. But Donald Trump, they didn't really need to compromise him, although maybe they did, but I don't think that was the point. I think in their case, they were mostly working with him, or at least allied with him. And that's why they were wild and fancy free in the 1990s. And that's why we didn't see Donald Trump so much at the island, because it wasn't really that crowd. It wasn't really the mobster crowd that they were trying to compromise. They were trying to compromise the celebrities and politicians. And at that time, Donald Trump was not that. So this idea that somehow Donald Trump is saving the kids by exposing Epstein is completely nonsense. He was there at the founding of Epstein. And when you look at the genealogy, the mobology of both Jeffrey Epstein and Donald Trump, you'll find a lot of the same people. This was meant to be a top 5 countdown of the shows today, but I got so stuck into the Epstein stuff, and then we had all sorts of technical issues, so I didn't quite get to do the other few shows, and I probably won't for the time being. But there were 4 other shows in our top 5 countdown, and we will get to them probably as in one show in the near future and count down the top 5. But if you missed them, they're in our Substack and they're in our Patreon. Please go and check them out. Those are really important episodes for understanding how we got to where we are today. And this is what I was trying to do in this opening episode, is just bring people up to speed about this enormous universe of operations that have taken place to bring us up to 2024. We had the Jeffrey Epstein Maxwell operation. We had the coronavirus operation, which we now know is a accidental lab leak. There was the idea of this revelation of this enemies of democracy and how they have been working their way through various democracies around the world, and particularly Israel. And we see what's happening in Israel right now. There's also revelations by Noel Kassler in our top 5, which talk about the drug use of Donald Trump, and a history of substance abuse and what he was like behind the scenes at those talent and pageant contest, and those events, show you that kind of person he was and how he treated women, how he treats women today. And so you see that in concert with all these kind of women that were being sexually tormented and abused, and you've got a real sense of the kind of people we're dealing with here, as they were trying to compromise American politicians. So that is our first show of the year. We will be back. I will be back with a lot of more typical shows that we've done in the past. But I did want to try bring back some of the Epstein Maxwell stuff to you. And I did want to underline these few facts, these themes that we need to keep expressing to people. This was a blackmail scheme where the targets, the victims here, are not just the young girls. The victims here are the politicians, and the victims are the voters, the American voters, who had their power taken away from them by this compromising. Every time a politician was compromised, what you voted for was discarded. And so we have to understand that in this context, this operation, the Epstein-Maxwell operation, was massive. It took down our ability to operate as a democracy for many years because so many people were compromised, and probably still are today, if you think about it. So keep that in mind. The blackmail is the thing. The blackmail of politicians is the thing. It's not about so much about the abuse of the young women, although that is a very credible and an important thing to be concerned about. It's the blackmail that everyone should focus on, and certainly the way we now know that Epstein took 11 flights to Russia and then 12 flights to Russia and 11 flights to Israel certainly underlines what I've been reporting for many years, that he is an Israeli military asset and has been and was. Of course, he's dead now, but that relationship also extended to the Russians. And so when you see a Donald Trump showing up in Helsinki next to a Vladimir Putin, and maybe he's a little bit shamed by what was shown to him, it's quite possible that some video showed up, in that conversation, and maybe that video originated, who knows where? Maybe it originated right in the Epstein files, who knows? But that Putin would have had access to all that content, and the Israelis would have had access to all that content, and they would have used it where necessary to convince people to do whatever they're doing. And we think about the House Speaker today, Mike Johnson. We think he's in the Kremlin camp. Well, look at the way he's operating. Look at the obstructionist way he's operating. Look at the entire GOP caucus right now and the awful way they're operating. It's because they're taking their orders from Russia, and they have no choice, because if they don't, the dirt will start flowing out, and that's what they know will happen. I have some sympathy for those Republican representatives, but not a lot. Those guys should resign. So, we have a challenge here because when you look at it, if you look at the GOP as a Russian-held Kremlin party, if you look at it that way, boy, is this election important because we could just elect the Russians into the entire executive branch and legislative branch come November. And that is not going to be a good ending. So I encourage you all to take this election as seriously as we all have been saying for the last few months. And I'll be here. We continue. This has been the longest I've ever been dedicated to any project in my life, but it seems we have to be all dedicated to this. This is the future of our democracy. I am very interested in introducing new voices on this show. So if you have anyone that you've encountered that you'd like me to interview on the show, if you yourself believe you're one of the people who should be on the show, I'd be more than happy to talk to you and see if we can get some new voices on here. In the past, we've had some interesting voices, which I've loved, but they've also, some of them have landed up not being completely independent. So I'd like to, if I could, find some new people to talk to, some people with a passion for democracy, some people who are out there in the field working hard, and some people who are deeply in their core and like to investigate. It's really important that we continue to investigate what's going on when it comes to the Epstein-Maxwell files or elsewhere. It's certainly going to be a big year for us. So I hope you guys will think about who you might want to have on the show. Plus, let me add one more thing here. We now have a Substack at narrative.substack.com. Narrative.substack.com. That may go to our main narrative.org domain at some point. Please check it out because it's different than Patreon, although the same content shows up. I don't want people just moving from one platform to another if you're getting the same content. That's not really necessary. But if you're making a choice of where you want to live with the Narrative, and I hope you will donate to Narrative, and I hope you'll subscribe to Narrative this year. It's so important that we can continue to do this work. Just think of all the stories in our top 5. Imagine those 5 stories had not been exposed. Imagine we were still here in a world where we didn't think China was a part of the enemies of democracy, or there really was an enemies of democracy. That's where we would have been. So, whether it's $8 a month or 10 or whatever it is you decide to subscribe at, think about that money as being incredibly valuable to history and to the record. And that's how we get to, spend, this is how we win at the end of the day. We win by investigating them and revealing who they are, which is, been a hell of a mission for the last 7 years. So Substack is narrative.substack.com, patreon.com/narrative. And on YouTube, you can join as well by going to youtube.com/@ and then Narrative. On a personal level, I should say that these are a bit difficult times for me, because I have an incredible person in my life who is my mother, who's not as well as we would like her to be. And I don't even want to talk about her because I know where that'll lead. But, she's going through some tough health issues right now, and it's taken up a lot of my time, and a lot of my family's time. So I love her just love her more than you can imagine. So that's why sometimes I'm not able to be online as much as I want to, and sometimes I'm not able to be here. But I will be here at least once a week with you in the coming few weeks. And I look forward to fighting this battle for democracy this year. I think this is going to be an incredibly important year. And so I hope and pray that all of you will be up for the fight, because it is going to be vital that we all spend as much time and energy in solving this problem that Donald Trump and company have created in America. We just have, maybe 10 months of democracy left, if you think about it that way. It's not really a large amount at all. On that note, I'm going to bid you a good night. This was a different show. I will give you that. But I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got some good information out of this. And I appreciate you so much for being here. Because without you, there would be no Narrative, and without Narrative, there'd be no opportunity for us to be able to do this the way we need to do this, which is to reveal the truth about what's going on in the world. It is. I'm confounded. I'm just looking at some of the comments here, just so I don't want to miss anything. It's on YouTube. People are saying, I'm confounded. We are here again after everything. I can't believe we're here again after everything either. I mean, it's kind of stunning to me that we are back to where we began. And this is just, the reality of this situation. These are very powerful forces. These forces are very powerful. They are intending to take out America. They are aiming at the core of who we are. We never won this war. We delayed this war, and now we're still fighting it. And I want people to understand that we are still very much in the throes of this battle. And we're not, we never really won. We never really got out of it. And when you can see the manipulation of the courts, when you can see how people are manipulating every single bit of news out there, the disinformation, the misinformation, boy, you can tell that we are still very much in the heart of it. The court cases, all of that, I wouldn't put too much into that. It would be great, wouldn't it, if we won those court cases and everything was over, but it's not. It's not. This is an incredibly sophisticated, multi-leveled, multinational operation designed to destroy the biggest superpower in the world. That's what we're dealing with. So if you think just the ordinary, hey, let's just show up and protest, or let's just vote, that's going to work, it's not going to work. There's got to be a lot more going on. And I believe there is a lot more going on. Thankfully to our president, Joe Biden, who's doing an immense job taking this on. But this is far from over. Anything can happen in November. Anything, really. On that note, I will leave you and bid you good night. It has been an interesting hour, and we shall see you again soon on Narativ next week, I promise.